Hello, hello. I guess you're here for threat detection and response. Today we have Will Bengtson from Hashicorp. For those who don't know, Hashicorp has been working remotely since the beginning of since the beginning. And 90% of the staff has always been remote. So it's really interesting for Will to get into how they do threat detection and response based off his experience in Netflix, also now in Hashicorp. So it's really great episode. If you have not started with threat detection or a response in cloud before, he gives into pointers. He talks about online training that you can get for people. He also shares his experience on working remotely effectively. So great episode. Let's get into it. If you like the episode, please subscribe and like the video. All right, let's get into the episode. Peace. Hello and welcome to Cloud Security Podcast. I have an amazing guest today, Will Bengtson. And I have known Will through the online community for a while. He was down here in Melbourne last year for an OWASP AppSec J conference as well. So I got to meet him in person and we got to talk about scuba diving and his amazing time he had in Australia. So welcome, Will. So glad to have you here, man.
Thanks for having me. It's exciting and good to see you again. It's been a while.
Yeah, thanks. For people who don't know you, and I don't feel I can do justice to what you've done so far in your career, which is amazing, by the way. What can you tell people about yourself and how can they, who is Will?
Let's see, who's Will? Will is I guess, a guy passionate about security that started as a generalist and kind of fell in love with the cloud and detection space. So I've spent a bunch of years, like traditionally from a software background, writing code and getting into security with the Department of Defense for the U.S. As a contractor, one of the defense contractors, and then kind of just found security and fell in love and have just gone off that career since then. I've had an amazing opportunity so far to be involved with companies that people have never heard of, that are super small, trying to build security within a company, to more popular brands like Netflix, and now with a great company, Hashicorp, which a lot of people, funny enough, still don't know until you start mentioning some of the products, and they're like, "Oh, that's Hashicorp. That's great." But yeah, just overall, just have always loved security. Fell in love with cloud, and things have just been super blessed, and things have kind of just fell in place for me.
That's awesome. Yeah, and that's a great intro as well. You're so down to earth with your intros, man. I would have worked for Netflix, worked for Hashicorp. First question that I usually ask people over here, being Cloud Security Podcast, what does cloud security mean for you?
For me, cloud security is security at the cloud primitive level, and so I say it's the security at the basis of the cloud provider. So what I mean by that is anything implemented on top of the cloud would be out of scope for cloud security. And so like if you use AWS as an example, security of all the services that they provide you. So if you think about like secure by default, securing load balancers, S3 buckets, IAM, to me, that's all within cloud security. Oftentimes people might even call it infrastructure security and make it a little more kind of at the infrastructure level within the cloud platform or cloud provider. That's typically where I scope cloud security. But depending on the company and the size, and obviously how big the team is and how fine-grained they want to divide out the work, it could include more. It could be the platforms that you're building on top of the cloud as well, that your employees are using. But for me, cloud security is securing the infrastructure of the cloud at the cloud native level.
Oh, sweet. And it's an interesting one because cloud native, what is cloud native for people who don't know about it?
I think cloud native is understanding what the cloud is meant for and how it can actually help you in developing approaches for security or your application and deployments that kind of fit the new age, or what people say is cloud, right? So it's not just taking your traditional application and lifting it over to the cloud, but it's potentially re-architecting it, using managed services to your advantage, and really truly grasping what the cloud has to offer from scaling, security, all those benefits.
Yeah.
So it's really
APIs
kind
and
of changing
everything. Yeah.
your mindset and using those APIs to uh, be successful in your deployments.
Yeah, perfect. And that's a great answer as well, because I feel, and I'm keen to know your thought on this as well, and we were touching on this just offline, cloud security also has changed the role of security quite a bit as well, where it's no longer, I'm going to ask you a few questions and you do the work, but it's a lot more about understanding the different services that the cloud has to offer, which you can use in security. Would you what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, with the cloud rapidly expanding, it's one. I think it's amazing how this type of role never really existed in the past. Now that the cloud exists, it's a thing, right? So super awesome to have a new area of security to focus. But when you
Yep.
think about like AWS and the number of services that they bring about every year that they launch, to me, cloud security is understanding those services and how they potentially affect your company or your applications that you're running, right? So understanding whether or not a service should be used within the company, what the potential misconfigurations are, the permission sets. So how could things go potentially awry or wrong?
Yeah.
To me, is all kind of part of the cloud security model of operating effectively at a cloud native or cloud level. It's just not one of those things that you want to just enable everything and start responding to things.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough. Um, how do you, so for people who are listening to this, obviously, one question that comes quite often is, how do you measure maturity? Like, what's the scale of maturity you've seen, which is like a basic security in cloud versus like, oh my God, these guys are super advanced. And how does someone measure it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you could measure it on like a scale if you wanted to think like, here's where we're not doing anything, we're not even looking at, or not even turning logs on,
Yep.
to here's where we do everything and we do it right and we do the advanced detections and all the things, right? So you could say like, here are the super advanced, if you want to call the most mature cloud practitioners on one side,
Yep.
and the people that aren't doing anything being the most immature in that scale.
Yep.
But I think it's very much dependent upon your environment and what the business actually needs to be kind of mature. Depending on your risk level, you could have like a simple example. You could have CloudTrail being logged. You could be monitoring it and detecting the things that you want and responding automatically to that. That seems like a very mature cloud approach, right?
Yeah.
You might not be looking at like ELB logs and detecting bot traffic and those kind of things, but maybe that's not important to the company or the risk profile of what you're doing. But for the core features and the things that you need, you're very mature, right? But someone might look in and think, oh, you're only doing these things, not these other things. You're not mature. But to your business model, you're very mature. And so I think it differs very much between company to company and industry to industry what you'd consider mature. Yep. But I think it boils down to, do you have visibility? Do you know what you're looking for? Can you find it if you need to find it? And do you have some sort of alerting and approaches to responding should an alert go off, right? You don't have to have the most automatic response, except in the cloud. I think it's very important that you have some way to respond fast because of how quickly things can go bad. But I think having visibility, ability to detect, and a plan to respond is a great start in a maturity model. You don't have to have all the various different really awesome tools. You don't have to be writing your own tools to be a very mature team. You can utilize vendors or open source and still be mature. But I think it's truly a hard question to answer. I think you have like a bunch of the different compliance frameworks which attempt to kind of show you where you stand. Yeah. But a lot of those things don't apply to a lot of places, right? I think there's a lot of areas in the cloud that are misunderstood, where even when you have the check the box compliance check mark, doesn't really buy you anything if you actually understand how the cloud works. So I think it's it's almost like in the application security world, they have the building security in maturity model, right? But there's no building security in cloud maturity model,
Yeah.
because I think it's really hard and it depends on the industry. Some things it's just not a risk, so you don't do them because it's overhead that you don't need to actually account for.
Hmm.
But
True.
yeah, I think it very much depends. But I think like if you had to dial down the things that you need, it's visibility, ability to monitor, ability to detect, and ability to respond. And if you can do those things effectively, then you probably have a very mature program.
Sure. And I think to your point, the maturity would come more from based on the business, the scenarios that are important for them. Like if you're not a company which has internet facing stuff, bot detection may not be the top of the priority, I guess. Whereas detecting something like an internal threat may be a priority at that point. So it comes back to so if there is someone who's listening to this has probably on the left side of the scale that you mentioned where they haven't done anything, where can they like what's that one or two things that they can do today which doesn't cost too much. I guess cost is probably secondary. What can they do today to just tick off those at least a couple of things that they should have at least from a basic foundation perspective?
Sure. I think the one thing I always recommend is the first thing you do is turn on CloudTrail and centralize it into S3.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of if you have a plan to use it, at least having that data should something go wrong. I mean,
Yep.
it's available in the console for you, but you only get 90 days like sliding history,
That's
so you
right.
might need to go back and get more. That's the thing I always recommend people to start with. Having a good way to manage accounts, so securing the root user, um, using AWS. If we're talking AWS, like organizations is a great way to manage accounts and manage permissions on what you can or cannot do in a
Mm-hmm.
certain account. If you can, if you don't have much S3 traffic or money's not an option, or it doesn't matter, then turning on S3 CloudTrail as well can be very useful from data security and seeing is data leaving your environment or being accessed inappropriately, those kind of things.
Yep.
But I would think from a cloud perspective, turning on CloudTrail to get visibility into what's happening in your accounts, protecting or having an account management model of how you manage the root accounts and account creation, and then trying to do IAM correctly from the beginning, and only providing access to the things that your users need access to, and not kind of the other way around. Because when you give everyone access to the world, and all of a sudden you want to start limiting it, that's when you start building bad relations with your teams, and that's really where the hiccup starts, right? Where I used to be able to do this myself, but now it's a process, and so people start viewing you as the kind of not an enabler, right, but a gate. So I think those would be my top things.
Awesome. And I think the something that sparked at that point was you can have CloudTrail logs and you can at least the bare minimum of storing it doesn't cost you much money as well.
Right.
And would you agree? Because I think S3 buckets are quite cheap as well, so it shouldn't really be an expensive
S3
affair.
storage is like pennies on the gigabyte or something.
Yeah.
So like I run I have probably 6 personal AWS accounts.
All right.
I don't access them a lot unless I'm doing development of tools or like trainings.
Yep.
But I have CloudTrail turned on all the time, and I never noticed that there's a charge on my credit card for those kind of things.
Oh, right. Okay. And so what's the and I guess to your point, if you want, you can go to the extreme of say connecting a CloudTrail to some Glue and quick sites and make some like really fancy dashboards as well if you want to. You can go to the next level of maturity. It gives you the foundation for that if someone wants to go down that path as well.
Yep.
In terms of multi-cloud, and this is a question that I keep getting quite often because a lot of people have started seeing Google Cloud creep in and Azure creep in. Are you seeing this around you as well, where multi-cloud is becoming a thing?
Yeah, I think so. I think as more and more industries are becoming comfortable of moving to the cloud, they're having certain requirements put on them to say you can't just put all your eggs in one basket or one tray, right?
Yeah.
you have to have a plan at least to account for what it would take to go operate in, say, GCP if AWS was your primary, or in Azure. Every cloud provider is catching up to AWS. AWS had the 5 or so year head start, right?
Yeah.
And so for the longest time, you could see the advantage, but I think the other providers are catching up rather quickly. And it can make sense, right? And if you think about like the traditional things that you did back in the data center world, from especially when you think of like right now, business continuity, right? Disaster recovery. How do you do that in the cloud? And I think the answer is potentially in other clouds.
Yep.
Right. So backing up data, even if you're not using another cloud platform as a means of compute, maybe it's a means of disaster recovery storage. I think I've seen more and more companies either switch cloud providers altogether to different. Maybe it's a cost savings. Maybe it's we need this one feature. I've seen very much hybrid approaches where we're going to have main things within AWS, but we really like BigQuery and the ability to do things over here in Google. So we're going to use that feature as well. And we really like, we don't want to manage AD, but we want AD. So we're going to go use Azure AD. Right. So I think it depends on what companies actually want. And there's some really cool tools out there and networking primitives now that enable you to have kind of that seamless cloud model of where you don't even need to know if you're talking to something in Azure or not, or GCP, that the network just happens, right? You kind of have that service mesh.
Right. Is that the service mesh thing? Is that like a data center thing, or is that being provided by the cloud providers themselves?
No, I think it's very much tooling on top of the cloud. So being able to have a proxy that knows where to route, and if you have the discovery in each cloud provider, then you say, hey, I want to talk to this thing. It doesn't matter if that thing's in Azure. It just routes the network. So as long as that path's there, it just works.
Right. And this kind of leads me to, I guess, the next obvious question, which is instant response. Now, maybe you can take instant response 2 steps. And I think the reason I'll probably go into why instant response a little bit later, but someone who's doing instant response in AWS today, starting with one account to, I don't know, hundreds of accounts, how do you see instant response done well from that perspective? And another layer to that is new accounts vending, if that plays a role in here. So yeah, keen to know your thoughts on that.
Sure. Yeah, I think for one thing, like I've always said that the cloud is amazing because of the API, and the cloud is the most dangerous place to live because of the API, right? You can build and destroy things so quickly. Yeah. And sometimes your visibility into what happens is delayed. So I think within incident response in the cloud, it's going to be very hard to be successful without some sort of automation, because you're going to need to move very quickly. I think that becomes more important over time. I think we're seeing the people that are, the adversaries are still learning the cloud alongside everyone else. Yeah. And so there's some super advanced ones and then not so advanced. So I think it depends on the flip of the coin of which one you get. Should you be doing incident response? Mm-hmm. But I think there's some really awesome, especially within AWS, right? People have been doing and presenting on this topic for many years now. So there's a lot of tooling that you can take advantage of. And the really cool thing is AWS is providing new features day in and day out, which allow you to continue to mature your tooling. So, I think a lot of it is the very same of what it once used to be in the data center world, right? You're seeing even the cloud perspective catch up to that, where before, from like a protection or response perspective, you had within the cloud, you had no network visibility. You had kind of the flow log, and that was it. But now AWS has introduced mirroring of traffic. And so that becomes very dangerous too in the cloud. It's like, do you actually want to mirror traffic? Because what all are you going to see? But some companies are like that very traditional approach of having Bro, the traditional IDS, IPS for a network standpoint.
Oh yeah.
but it's still very much, in order to respond in the cloud, you're still having to build a lot of tooling. So it would be really awesome if cloud providers would start making it an API call to do some of the more common things versus everyone writing the same tooling, or, hey, I'm going to go use this tool to do the things because this is what I have to do in the cloud. So you're starting to see a lot of new vendors and cloud things come out with like auto remediation, which makes responding to incidents easier, where if you see that misconfiguration happen, fix it really quick so that you don't have the incident later.
Yep.
So I always like when incident response leads to working in preventions or protections so that something doesn't happen. That's, to me, always the really cool part of incident response, because your detection piece, which, you have detections leading to the response. Detections, to me, are telling you where a prevention worked or where a gap still exists that potentially you can put a prevention in place. And then you have all the unknown, right?
Yeah.
So it's really cool to see when you start shifting more into, hey, my protection worked, right? We saw someone misconfigure this, we saw it auto fix, and now this doesn't have to escalate to an incident overall.
Yeah.
But yeah, overall, I think incident response in the cloud there's still a lot of really cool areas to dig into. It's like as companies continue to scale and move fast, incident response just has to continue to work that scale and, I guess, move that fast as well.
So maybe we can take a layer deeper then. With incident response, do you what's an approach you recommend for people? And I keep going back to people who are probably starting up today. Like, having a quarantine organization unit is something that people talk about, where you isolate or basically you deny everything using an SCP. And we're talking specifically AWS. But how do you structure for this if you have not done this before? So have a separate incident response account. And this is me making it up as I go, but because this is the examples that I've seen. But curious to know from your side, how do you see this set up in an organization where they may already have an incident response team or a forensic team? And how does that access kind of come back into, oh, there was an incident, an EC2 instance has been isolated, blah, blah, blah has happened, we've moved into an organization unit. Is there a walkthrough that you can probably share with us?
Yeah, I think I've seen a lot of people go to implement or talk about the isolation OU within organizations of deny everything. I think the problem of denying everything is that you deny yourself access to view what is going on as well. And so I've seen that mistake happen where people do a deny star, which stops the attack, but it also stops you from being able to respond to the attack and analyze and actually make a move.
Yeah.
So there's some tooling out there already that you could point at an instance, and it attempts to isolate an instance. I think some of the most important tooling that you can build if you're starting to build automation, starting from the left of not having anything, is some simple scripts that can take a snapshot of a given instance. So you at least have what is running. You don't necessarily have the memory, but you have what is on disk. Being able to copy that if you have a separate incident response account that you can copy that snapshot into to then do your analysis. So, the thought is if the credential on that box was very permissive and the attacker knew what they were doing, if they saw you were taking snapshots, they could delete them, right? It depends on how active that attacker is.
Yeah.
But having some simple things to be able to perhaps remove the network attachment from the instance so that there's no outbound traffic anymore. So if they were trying to steal data or execute API calls that they can't, right? Having kind of playbooks in place for what happens if a AWS credential is exposed. I think those are some of the most crucial starting blocks to building some incident response tooling within AWS that you could do.
Sure.
And I think there's some really cool open source projects that have done a bunch of this that either you can just look and see how they did them and learn how to build them yourself, or see how they can fit into your kind of toolbox.
Sure. Cool. And I probably might reach out to you later on for the resources that you can possibly share with the audience. That's great about incident response, right? Do you reckon it's a challenge in the industry and this is me switching gears to training now, because to your point about not everyone's cloud native, not everyone's cloud ready, for lack of a better word. How do you see people train, I guess, for cloud security? As a security team, a lot of people have done traditional data center security, and the mindset shift itself is very different in cloud. So obviously you manage a team yourself. And if you had, so if I was a manager listening to this who has a team that's been assigned to him, it's a security team, where do they start with training? Like what kind of stuff they should be trying to look for in a potential training for their staff?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of the I started in the cloud just as a red teamer, trying to spin up phishing boxes, right? To phishing domains. That's where I really started using the cloud, and I really started learning the cloud when I started actually building applications and deploying them on the cloud and needing to secure them. So I think a great place to start is to kind of set an objective of something that you know an outcome for, and say, hey, we want to go build this securely, and give it kind of as an onboarding project to the user, to your team, and say, hey, here's your first month, go build these things, and that allows them to exercise through the various different services that potentially your company is using, and setting them up and have an end result that you expect it to be, right? And then you could have something that goes through and make sure it looks correct, right? But I think it's important, like that. I think the hands-on approach is the best approach, giving them something to build and work towards, that allows them to come up to speed with how some of these things work. As they're doing it, they're not going to get it correct the first time, so they're going to stumble into a lot of things that your engineers and other departments are going to stumble on, and they're going to learn from that process. Because I think within cloud security or incident response, the key fundamental piece is understanding the cloud and how it operates, and most importantly, understanding the services, and hopefully understanding them as much or more than the teams that will be using them day in and day out. Because it's really once you start understanding the intricacies of each service that you understand like how something so small can turn into something so bad. So outside of building exercises and doing them within your team and yourself and just kind of learning on the job, I think SANS has been doing some really good stuff on building out a cloud security area of their program. And incident response as well. There's trainings at local conferences and the mass conferences. I think we talked earlier. I'm doing a training with Rich Mogul on incident response in the cloud at Black Hat this year. So I think it'll be really great. I've given trainings on AWS in the past that have been from starting on the very far left, right? If you know nothing about the cloud, let's understand, here are the basic things on the top 12 services that you should know. Here's the one checkbox you should always tell people never click, right? But I think a lot of it leads back to the making sure there's a hands-on component, because if you read something and don't actually go practice it, then you're going to forget it, right? You're going to be like, I think I remember something about that, but I don't exactly remember which button to click. But I think ultimately there's a lot of great training resources out there. Ask around, see what other people have taken, because I think there's a lot of courses out there that probably aren't what they describe, and you aren't going to get maybe as much as you thought for your money. But there's a lot of just great open source resources. A lot of companies are writing blog posts on how they've done some things, right? I learned, I learned to code by reading other people's code, and learning patterns. So I think also learning in the cloud is very similar too. How did someone else solve this problem? Spending time on a given service, I think is good. But, I think ultimately finding something that gives a good deep knowledge transfer from text perspective, but complemented with that technical hands-on approach is kind of what I look for in trainings.
That's awesome, and I think it's important to call out the hands-on aspect of it, especially in the cloud, because you can't auto respond if you don't know how to code unless you find people to code. So that's a good segue into teams. And what made me think of teams is that when you mentioned training, we're living the dreaded days of COVID right now, where a lot of things are remote. I believe your team is remote as well, primarily. I don't know if it was the case before, but how do you guys function now? Because a lot of people have to do remote work. How does how do you see this work effectively? Like, what works in a remote land? Because you were doing remote work before the whole COVID thing happened. So keen to know something that you can share in case this COVID thing goes on for the rest of the year, and all of us go remote primarily. What has worked for you, and how can we use it, or what can we borrow from it, I guess?
Yeah, no, great question. Yeah, luckily, I think it's something like 90% of Hashicorp is remote.
All right.
So it's been very easy for us, fortunately in today to continue operating effectively, or as effectively as we can. I think, but I guess when I first started working remote back in the day, the things I really had to come up to speed with and be very stringent on was setting up a work environment and not just working from the couch or something like that, right? And I know a lot of people, because I used to live in the Bay Area, right? And so space is critical out there. Sometimes you can't have a separate office, right? But maybe setting up your computer on a countertop instead of working from the couch. Those little things that allow you to focus more on the work versus being distracted. Because I think that'll be the first thing people experience working from home if they haven't, is the distractions, right? Oh, maybe I should go do this load of laundry. I want a snack, right? Those kind of things. But I think the most important thing you can do is if you're able to, set up a separate work environment in your home, right? So I have a standing desk, and it's very comfortable for me. It's just like if I was still working in the Bay Area, right? I became used to that atmosphere, and so now when I work from home, I want that atmosphere.
Right.
I'm fortunate enough in my life right now, I don't have children or anything, so there's no real distractions around me except my dogs. But my coworkers and employees that have kids, they think it's very important to set boundaries with your family if you're able to. Hey, if this door's shut, dad's working.
Right.
So I think some of those things are helpful as well. But I think the most important thing that's allowed us to be effective working remotely is just how thoughtful the company's been in setting kind of communication standards. And when you communicate via email versus Slack or Zoom, and kind of the usage of each, and which technology is best for which type of communication you need at that given time. From a decision standpoint perspective, we do everything within RFCs. So when we want to develop a new feature or a new product or deploy a new tool, we end up writing an RFC about it. And it allows us to publish our thoughts and ideas and give everyone across multiple time zones ample time to provide feedback and comments, and allow you to learn how your solution might break someone else in a way that you didn't know because you didn't overhear them talk about something in the hall anymore, or you weren't able to swing by their desk and just randomly ask about something. So that's been really beneficial. And I read some comments online, funny enough, about kind of the RFC process, and I'd never even thought about it, but heaven forbid if I get sick, or I was on vacation when someone sent out a design document or an RFC, the process allows you to come back to work and catch up and still have your voice heard on that given solution as well. And I never really thought about that, because since starting here at Hashicorp, I've only been here a short while now. Haven't taken really any time off, so I've been able to, as things come out, here's my thought, or here's my expertise, or in the past I've seen this go bad because of this. But if you're sick, especially right now, if you were to fall ill with COVID-19, in 2 weeks or whatever, when you're feeling better, you can come back in and still be heard on that given document, which I think is really powerful, especially in this day and age when people aren't being heard
Yeah,
within companies.
that's right.
But
So,
yeah, I think ultimately, the best thing about the remote work has been the way that the company sets standards on communicate. If you want a response fast, pull up a Zoom, right? If you need something within an hour or so, Slack is probably the right means. If it's not super important, email is probably better. And then setting up we have naming standards for channels within Slack and stuff as well.
all right.
So it's really easy to find the right team that you need to talk to. Where you might go to this side of the building to talk to this one team. It's really easy to kind of find them. And I think the combination of all that's made it really effective for us to work remotely.
Right. Because I find it hard with remote working. How do you find the person you need to talk to for something? That
Yeah, I mean, especially if you're new, it can be very hard, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So if you know the team, it's easy to guess the team channel, right? Oftentimes I will ask people in my team, hey, do you know who owns this?
All right.
I actually just learned of a new channel that we have. We have a channel at Hashicorp that we can go into and ask, hey, does anyone know who the owner of this service is? And it's kind of a group of people that have been there, and they can point you to the right direction, right? And most people, if you reach out to them and they end up not being the right person, they're happy to direct you to the right person or help you kind of along your journey of finding that correct person.
Yeah, I like that channel because I think because I was thinking as the more different companies, obviously as they go through the COVID thing, they would have new people joining in, and as the new people join in, they all go into Slack. They're like, well, it's a lot of channels. Where do I start? And who am I supposed to be talking to? Like, a lot of people have this whole onboarding presentation as well. It's a great time to introduce something like, oh, if you don't know where to go for help for this, just go here. I think that's a great idea. And
Yeah,
sorry, go on.
I was going to say within our security team, we have an onboarding guide,
Okay.
and it talks about here are the channels that probably you should join, and kind of just a quick description of what each channel's for, and some like given tasks of here are the documents that you should probably read to catch up and have an understanding of how we operate, how we communicate, the employee handbook, the base like RFCs that are going to talk about the technologies that we're building and those kind of things.
Yeah.
So it's as an employee, your first couple of weeks are really spent kind of coming up to speed on where the company is, and then when about time when it's you start actually working on some things, you've got an idea and kind of like this second nature, or it's really intuitive on where you go to find the information. But I think knowledge management's a problem at any company.
Yeah.
Even at Hashicorp, sometimes it's hard to find things that we need. But it's just asking someone, and someone has a link, and they're happy to help.
Right. Also, I guess you can still use all the online Confluence and other resources because sometimes you might be thinking, oh, has anyone done this before? And you get but you just were not able to find that Confluence page, I guess.
Yeah, and luckily, we're a G Suite shop, so cloud search is a great thing to search across all docs.
Oh yeah, BigQuery helping. BigQuery helping in the background, I guess.
Yeah.
That's amazing, man. I think that would be really helpful for a lot of people starting. But do you find recruiting I'm not sure if you're recruiting at the moment, but in terms of recruiting for cloud security specialists, like I think a lot of people that I've had spoken to, their students, and they're looking for that crack into how do I crack into this world of cloud security. We kind of touched on what's the training that you can do for the staff. And would I be right in assuming that's applicable for students as well? Like they can go down that path of learning cloud and do that. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would definitely agree. Students can do just the same things that the staff is doing. Anytime that you can get that hands-on experience and operating in the cloud, I think is great. From a student perspective, I wish I knew more about it back when I was going to school. But the Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition is something in the U.S.
Okay.
Where schools are able to compete in a like blue team perspective, where they're given a set of infrastructure that is half configured, and they have to go stand up all the services and secure them and protect them from an active red team. And so it
Wow.
gives them like a firsthand look of what potentially they'll be doing if they continue their security career in the blue team world, at least.
Wow.
And I think more and more it's leaning towards cloud type operations where I know like I've helped the school here in Dallas, Southern Methodist University before,
Hmm.
and one of the organizers there had built out a game board in the cloud, and a lot of the things can be done in the cloud now. But it really gives them a good first on kind of hands-on look of what it actually takes to run, say, a MySQL database and patch it and secure it and keep the bad guy out.
Yeah.
Like that kind of experience is priceless when it comes to applicants, and so all that
100%.
stuff is available to students. And nowadays, with uh, online resources for learning, there's so much you can do. It's just I guess the hardest part with learning on your own online and not going to a training course is kind of the discipline you need to sit and walk through everything. Where if you're lucky enough to have the money or have a scholarship to be able to go to an in-person training somewhere that's not at a conference like B-Sides where it's typically free,
Yeah.
the beauty there is you're there, right? Your time is dedicated while you're at the thing, but there's so much online that you can learn.
Yeah, that's a great answer, man. That's a good way for me to move into the next segment as well. It's called the Mythbusters. The first question is, what is the most common cloud security myth or misconception that you hear about public cloud?
Oh gosh, there's so many.
Yeah.
So I think the first myth that I've heard some people say is that moving to the cloud is easy or more secure. Where I think there's a lot of truth to it, but until you understand how the cloud operates and the different services work, there's a lot of room for mistake, and so that's where you see the common misconfigurations or vulnerabilities that lead to compromise within companies.
Yep.
But I don't know. I think that's a common one that I hear all the time is that
Yeah.
it's going to be great. Or I think the one that's I think more applicable is I can run my applications in the cloud just like I do at the data center. And so like moving the cloud is just doing the same thing as I'm doing on the data center.
Yeah.
Because you see it all the time is the lift and shift, right? People
Yep.
people have coined that term because it happens. And so I think that's a myth because I guess one of the advantages to running in the cloud is that you're going to scale potentially, and lifting and shifting is not going to help you scale very effectively from taking advantage of the services.
Yeah.
But I think those two would probably be the myths that I would.
Perfect. No, thank you.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's a great one. I think the common one we hear from our previous guest has been the cloud is not secure. That's the other one that like, well, it's secure as long as the person is securing it knows what they're doing, I guess.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, very much so. The cloud platform itself is very secure. How you implement things on the cloud may not be secure, right?
That's right. That's right. The next question that I have is it's more around what are people not talking enough about cloud security? What are they not talking about cloud security that you wish they were talking about cloud security?
I love immutable infrastructure, and I
Yeah.
don't hear a lot of talks about it and kind of the benefits there. But I think when you think about, I guess for those listening that aren't aware of what immutable is, it's kind of the premise that every time you make a change, you build something new. So in the AWS world with Amazon machine images, every time you want to deploy an application, you build a new machine image, and the application's ready to run from the time it boots. And so there's no configuration done on startup, and you're not using something like Chef or Puppet once the instance is up and running to configure it. But the benefit there is if you do things correctly and you become that mature cloud or the mature practice, right? You can get to a point where you're not even SSHing to boxes ever, right? If you think your logs are always being shipped off, it's like a rare, like a really hard bug to figure out that you might have to go on box and just see is something really interesting. but you can start approaching a world where SSH becomes less of a thing, at least.
Yeah.
And so it provides you a lot of advantages from being able to alert if a box is accessed by someone, because this isn't really normally done.
Yeah.
Rolling out changes, it's patching becomes easier because you can test it before actually making the patch. It just becomes easier. And I think when you start adapting to the cloud and really embracing the cloud native aspect of auto scaling, and I think the thing at Netflix coined the chaos engineering of the cloud, right?
Yeah.
If you can just destroy something and it just auto recovers or keeps working.
Yeah.
To me, like the thing that I don't hear people talk about a lot is once you move to an immutable world and kind of embrace auto scaling and the ability to scale in and scale out and recover, you can start doing some really interesting things like deploying more frequently, or say have a policy where you must redeploy your application every day.
Yeah.
Right? If you're doing config as code and it's immutable, there's no reason why you can't. It's just putting the automation in place to do it. But if you think about from an attacker perspective, if I'm trying to exploit something and I'm making progress, or if I did get access to a box, if that box goes away really quick, it limits my ability to be effective. And I don't see a lot of people talking about that, which would be really interesting if they could. But I still see people talking about using mutable infrastructure, and that it very much could work for a lot of companies. But I think if people just move to like the immutable infrastructure from the beginning, it could be like a really, really powerful movement.
Yeah, but and that's an interesting one, because how does security work in that case? You know how to your point about immutable infrastructure, because a lot of security depends on the fact that it was this instance ID blah, which was the root cause of the problem. But by the time you got to it, it's already been destroyed and a new instance has come up. For me, that's like another layer of complexity. Have you had any experience with that kind of a setup where, I mean, I guess I'm assuming with Netflix, but it comes and goes, but you still have to go and investigate an incident. How do you?
Yeah, so I mean, it becomes problematic, right? If the thing that was exploited is no longer there, so your evidence or the forensics value goes away, right?
Yeah.
Theoretically, if you're building machine images every time, you have something that represents what the instance looked like at the configuration. So you have something to work on, at least for, say, a red team to go figure out how did this get exploited.
Yeah.
But if you enable logging and such, you have most of the artifacts, except for like a memory snapshot that you probably need for that configuration. So as long as you can ensure that before the instance terminates, it's shipping off the logs that you need, you theoretically have most of what you probably need for your investigation.
All right. Yeah.
Like I got an abuse complaint once about an IP being used to serve malicious content.
Right.
And when looking, it's like we had this IP for 4 minutes, and I was able to find that because CloudTrail showed the IP, right? And so I had some logs to actually show that, hey, even though the instance is long gone by the time I saw that abuse complaint, here's the instance that showed that this instance launched at this time. It made this API call from this IP, and it got destroyed at this time. And so I think there's still a lot of valuable data that you can get, even with a very, very short-term instance. You might not just have like the traditional ability to do things like take a memory snapshot and things that some people's response playbooks might rely on. But I think there's a lot of other things that you can put in place to make sure you have just as much valuable forensic data to be able to like at least get a lot of way through your investigation without necessarily maybe knowing the particular attack or how they might have stolen a credential from memory or something like that.
Right. No, dude, that's a great answer, man. Thank you.